and I saw the back and forth between the Senate and the Board of Supervisors. Having been a state senator, but also involved in elections, I called to offer if I could be of any assistance, and doggone it, she called me back and said, would you be a liaison so that her and the rest of you here in session could focus on that, and she asked me to be the Senate liaison, and that's been the role I've been performing.
Great. Thank you. Mr. Cotton.
I'm the founder of Cipher LLC. Cipher LLC is a national level incident response and forensics firm specializing in helping companies solve problems. We also support legal firms in both the plaintiff and the defense side of the legal matters that may arise involving digital evidence. I personally have over 25 years of computer forensics and incident response experience. 13 of those years were spent as a part-time instructor to Guidance Software. They're now owned by OpenText. They are the manufacturers and the makers of the EnCase software. I have a master's degree in information technology. I also am a CISSP and hold numerous forensics certifications.
Very good. Madam President, if it's okay, I would like to start with the first question.
Please.
And this question would be for Mr. Logan. We've heard that there were other audits that have already been done. Why do we need to do this audit? So I'm hoping you can help me understand how this audit is different than some of the other audits that have been done.
Sure. So the other audits primarily focused on making sure that the version of software that was expected to be running on the machines, whether that's the tabulators or the EMS or so forth, was in fact the version that was in use. They also did, they ran some off-the-shelf software to detect any malware that's on the machines, and they ran logic and accuracy testing, which involves taking about 100 sample ballots, run it through the system, and making sure that for those sample ballots they're counting. But at no point in any of those audits did they actually take a look at actual ballots and run those ballots through the system or do actual counting of it to validate the results. They were all focused on whether it was the right type or whether the right version of the software. Our audit is focused on specifically the results. Are the results exactly as they came through? Are they the way they were cast? And does it go all the way through the system that way?
Okay, thank you. Did you want to ask?
Security? You want to talk about security at this point, or are you moving that down?
I can. That's the only question I have for now.
Okay, thank you. Okay, we'll move the this. Well, do you want to do the security now or later?
Yeah, I'll ask that. I'll
Okay,
ask that
go ahead.
later. You can ask about the next question.
So let's move on. We'll move to the security after this because I think what we need to do is, first of all, get some stuff straightened out. We're trying to, as I said, we appreciate you being here. You are our liaison, and you are our hired contractors. And with that, we have a contract with you with expectations of what needed to be done and at what point it's going to do. So I think what we want to do is, first of all, let's start at the beginning and let's talk about chain of custody and that process. I know that Doug, you and Ken were both involved with that. I want to make very, very sure that any questions about how that all happens, we as a Senate body need to know that that was done correctly on everybody's part. So could you please address the chain of custody issue?
Okay. That would probably best be me.
Okay.
Madam President, I was the liaison for the Senate, and I dealt directly with the county when they showed up on April 21st and 22nd. The machines and equipment were delivered mostly on the 21st. There was one pallet, I think, of machines that came on the 22nd, and then the ballots also were delivered on the 22nd to the Veterans Memorial Coliseum. As your agent, as your liaison, I took the lead. I want to compliment Maricopa County and their co-election director, Scott Jarrett. He was very professional on both of those days. They were very long days. We received The equipment went probably a little more smoothly than the ballots. I don't think there was any variations on the manifests of the equipment to what was actually there. But we checked off 385 ballot tabulation machines and 4 large high pros and the Canon high volume scanners and some other related equipment. That went very well on the 21st. On the 22nd, we received 46 pallets of the ballots. We did have some minor issues that we worked through together on that day. We had, for example, 26 boxes that were mismarked on the manifests, but we corrected those as we ran into them. Mr. Jarrett and I personally inspected all 46 pallets and all 1,681 boxes. We found the 26 mismarked ballots and corrected those on the manifests. We found 8 boxes that were on the ballots but not listed on manifests. 1 on pallet 12, 4 on pallet 22, 2 on 38, and 1 on 41. Just to kind of give you the level of detail that he and I were kind of working through on that day. We did find a couple of boxes that were listed on the manifests but not on the pallet. That was on pallet 40, and we determined that they had been combined with 2 of the other boxes that were listed on the pallet. And then we found 3 boxes listed as being on pallet 43, but they were actually on pallet 45. So we worked through all of those issues. Mr. Jarrett was very professional, and the other county staff that were with him, and we worked through all those issues. I think that's. As I've read your letter, Madam President, I think perhaps the county misinterpreted the chain of custody question that we were asking, which I've been asking for weeks myself, and that is the chain of custody between the election in November and when the ballots were delivered to us on the 21st and 22nd of April. The link in that chain that occurred on those 2 days in April that delivered the ballots to me as your representative and to the Coliseum, that link is very secure, and we understand it correctly. We both agreed, as I said, on 1,681 boxes of ballots on 46 ballots, and but the question we had that we still haven't received as far as chain of custody is the documentation of the chain of custody between when the ballots or boxes in the ballots, boxes with ballots in them, started to be filed away in their warehouse between the election and April 22nd is kind of the questions that we still haven't seen any chain of custody documentation. There was a pretty famous tweet with a picture of 8 or 10 pallets that seemed to be loaded in the back of a truck that was tweeted out shortly after I think the court decided that your subpoenas were legitimate. And it seemed to be tweeted out by the chairman of the Board of Supervisors saying that we have these ballots ready to deliver. We would have liked to and still would like to see the chain of custody documents between November and April to see if that type of an event is on those chain of custody documents. But it's the chain of custody between November and April that we haven't received.
Just to that point, Madam President. Mr. Bennett, so the President had a question about chain of custody. The question was, or I guess the question was from what was the chain of custody from November to April 21st, and the county has still not provided that chain of custody. Is that correct during that window?
That's correct. The chain of custody documentation that I still possess and the county possesses a copy as well is what happened when they transferred machines and ballots to us on April 21st and 22nd. We don't have any chain of custody documentation prior to that.
Okay. There was, and this is the capacity I'm asking you as a past Secretary of State and somebody that's been involved with elections for a lot of years. Can you answer for me, we have 15 counties in Arizona. Does all 15 county recorders, do we have set laws that outline the chain of custody? So do all 15 counties handle the ballots exactly the same way? Do they package them, unpackage them the same way? Is there any standard procedures?
Well, There are state statutes in ARS 16, and ballot handling issues and chain of custody issues are in state statute. There's also an election procedures manual that is adopted every other year on the off election year by the Secretary of State's office. During my 6 years as Secretary of State, I oversaw the development of 3 of those election procedures manual. Those also speak to general requirements for how to handle ballots, how to document chain of security, but does every county do it the same? No. Obviously, we have some very large counties, Maricopa and Pima. We have some medium-sized counties, and then we have some very small counties. And my experience during my 6 years as Secretary of State were that within the parameters of state law and the election procedures manual, counties can do things a little bit different.
Okay, thank you. Well, and one of that questions was because referring to is making sure that if we hired somebody to go do an audit in Pima County or something, they would find other procedures, because we're not all doing the same exact thing in each county. So, which is why it's important for us to figure out
Correct.
what this county's procedures are, so we can help each other out on this one. Mr. Logan, can you address for us the chain of custody and the ballot count? You know, once Mr. Bennett says that he has checked them all in, along with Mr. Jarrett, and we received them there. We'll get into the security issues, you know, the procedures in a little bit, but let's stay on target with the equipment and the ballots. Wait, let me back up a second. Let's talk about equipment a second. You relayed in the concerns that you had that I relayed to Maricopa County Board of Supervisors. There were questions about the routers that we were supposed to, from our subpoena, we were going to get things. You had mentioned to me before I did this letter of a concern that we were supposed to get some equipment and we didn't get it. Could you explain that to us, please?
A little over a week before the machines were to be delivered, I was having questions with Mr. LaRue, the Assistant County Attorney, as to how they were going to handle the routers that were part of the subpoenas and the other hubs and related internet connectivity equipment, if that's the term. I'm not sure it is, but I'll call it that. And about a week before the machines were to be delivered, I called Mr. LaRue and offered that we could have the contractor that would be looking at the routers actually come to McTech and look at the routers while they were still installed and in place in McTech, so that nothing had to be removed or disturbed. He called me back the next day and said that they had removed all of the equipment and that they had replaced it at great expense to the county, and that all of that would be on a pallet delivered with the rest of the equipment on what turned out to be April 21st. When the 21st arrived, and I couldn't see or identify that pallet of internet equipment or routers or hubs or whatever, I asked him where they were, and he said that they had decided not to do it that way, that they were still back in the building, and that they would provide us virtual access was the term that he used. I believe these two gentlemen were standing nearby me when that happened. And so we were told that instead of receiving that equipment, we would receive virtual access. That continued to be their position for more than 2 weeks. And when we finally pushed on when are we going to get virtual access, then they eventually came back and said that the routers in McTech are somehow connected to the Sheriff's Department and other county departments, and that if they gave them to us or even gave us virtual access, that Social Security numbers would be at risk and county health records, and so they have now refused to give us even virtual access.
So, Madam President, if I may, I think this is a really important issue because one of the things that we need to complete this audit is the routers. You asked for the routers. The county has said that we would get the routers. We've just heard testimony that they had already disconnected them and they were sending them over. Then they showed up and said that was and then they showed up and said that the routers would be provided, you'd be provided virtual access to the routers. And Mr. Bennett, you said that was actually in person, and these two gentlemen were present?
Yes.
Mr. Logan, were you present when the county said they would provide virtual access?
Yes, sir. And they also said they'd give us Splunk logs as well, so detailed logs of all the network activity.
Okay, and Mr. Cotton, were you present when the county said they would provide virtual access as
I
well?
was.
Okay.
Question, did you receive those Splunk logs that they promised? No?
No, ma'am.
Okay, sorry, go ahead, Senator Beasley.
So Madam President, I just think it's really important that we put that on the record, that we were told that we'd get them, even heard that they were, it sounds like, possibly a misunderstanding, if we give them the benefit of the doubt, is a misunderstanding that they were already disconnected and ready to send. And then ultimately, at some point, it changed to, we're not going to give them to you because of security issues. And so my question with that would be, we've got cybersecurity people here. What was offered so that we could, what's offered so that we can deal with these security concerns with us looking at the routers? And I guess we'll start with Mr. Logan on that.
So the Splunk logs, if we had the complete Splunk logs, would be something that'd be very useful in order to look through things. But I'm actually going to defer to Mr. Cotton on this because this is his expertise of what he'd look at.
All right. Yeah, Mr. Cotton, if you could, what can we, help us understand how we could look at the routers and this could be a secure process?
So first of all, if I could explain kind of the function of a router in layman's terms. So if you think of a packet of data as an envelope in the U.S. postal system, the router is essentially the carrier that delivers that envelope to the right mailbox, okay? You've got a originating address, you've got a destination address, the data is contained in a packet, and the router typically does not record any of that information inside of the packet. It simply delivers that envelope to the proper mailbox that it's destined for. My confusion here with the stance that the county is taking is that, well, it's twofold. So the first point of concern / confusion is the assertion that PII data and Maricopa County resident data would be compromised by examining the router. That data should not exist on that router, period. So to state that it could be compromised would be an inaccurate statement or an inaccurate portrayal of what the data is on the router. The second piece on this that is concerning to me is that there have been public reports by ProVNV, there have been statements by the county saying that these election systems don't actually touch the internet. Therefore, the extension of that would be that they do not touch the county network because that's exposed to the internet. And to say that the data corresponding to these networks would somehow compromise law enforcement activity or PII data seems incongruous to the previous statements. Okay, and if you take the letter, which states these compromises would occur at face value, then de facto that means that the election data had to be exposed to the internet, which I don't know if it's the case or not, but that's certainly something that we need to explore given the inconsistencies in these public statements and reports that they have presented. The actual fact is that after they shut down the provisioning of us with this data, there have been no other offers for us to get access to the data, to review the data, or otherwise obtain that data.
So, Madam President, if I may, Mr. Cotton, have you, what kind of experience do you have accessing confidential or top secret data?
So we routinely work for some of the largest companies in the world with incident response breaches, with forensics matters, and we are entrusted with that data, and we have never had an exposure, a leak, or any type of data being emitted from our custody. I also have personal experience at the highest levels of government supporting agencies in which security clearances are required.
So, Madam President, Mr. Cotton, are you confident that you could look at the routers without risking any security concerns or breaches to the county?
Yes.
Thank you. So let's go back to the chain of custody, the process and the issues. Let's go to Mr. Logan at this point. So Mr. Bennett has testified as to the equipment and the ballots coming in and up to that point. Now, from there, this is where you guys step in and you start actually doing the processing. Tell us what the list that you sent to me, which I included in the letter to Maricopa County asking for some explanations. Could you please explain to us what your concerns are, or what have you found, and why we're looking for these questions, these answers to these questions?
Sure. So in the boxes, there have early voting transmittal sheets that give the counts that are supposed to be within a given box. And specifically, the county's response stated that the reason why the number that we counted did not match what was expected was because of duplicates. Now, duplicate ballots occur when a voting machine can't process a ballot. That could be because it's got a coffee stain on it and they don't think it's going to run through it. It could be because the ballot is damaged, or it could be any other reason that wouldn't run through it. But part of their explanation is that the sheets, that specifically that was related to the duplicates, but if we look at the specific example they have, there's actually a bottom part of the sheet right here where if anything is sent over to duplication, it's supposed to be filled out. So I'm looking at specifically the one that they had pulled out, which was, I think it was bin number 197, so it's tray number 2104. And if you take a look at the sheet, you'll notice that there's nothing down here. They said there was, I think they said there was 2 or 3 that were duplicates, but there's nothing listed as duplicates. If instead we took a look at tray number 6359, you'll notice that there's 3 that are duplicates. So while the count in here, we'd expect it to be 3 lower than what the total count was because they're taken out for duplicates. For the example that they gave us, there's nothing listed. And so our understanding, if this form is filled out properly, the duplicates should be referenced in here, and we're not finding that be the case. And our numbers across the board showed that. We took into account duplicates in the information that we gave, and it wasn't explained. So I'm still uncertain as to why these boxes are off and these sheets do not match the reality of what we're running into.
And for the record, those are included as exhibits in the letter that we sent to the supervisors asking them, could you help us understand why the rest of these sheets aren't filled out? And why they're not indicating where there may have been duplicates. And for the record, can you also explain what is a duplicate? Why would we ever need a duplicate ballot?
Okay, so yes, I can say that we gave those examples. We specifically want to give examples. Those are not the only boxes that we've run into this way, or only batches we've run into it. We wanted to make sure that we gave some specifics so that they could look back to the records and tell us what actually happened there. Duplicates, as was mentioned a little bit earlier, are because a ballot cannot run through a tabulated system, whether that's because it's damaged or whether the machine just won't actually handle it. So when that's the case, they take the ballot, they create a duplicate of it. That duplicate is then run through the system in order to do the counting, and the duplicates are all put together as the originals for what the duplicate was based off of.
Okay. Mr. Bennett,
Madam President, this comes right out of ARS 16621, which says, if any ballot, including any ballot received from early voting, is damaged or defective so that it cannot properly be counted by the automatic tabulating equipment, a true duplicate copy shall be made of the damaged or defective ballot in the presence of witnesses and substituted for the damaged or defective ballot. It also says all duplicate ballots created pursuant to this subsection shall be clearly labeled duplicate and shall bear a serial number that shall be recorded on the damaged or defective ballot. We started into our first boxes of ballots that were damaged and had to be sent to duplication. There's some other situations, for example, Braille ballots. I looked at a box of Braille ballots the other day, and a Braille ballot is about the size of a cookbook, and it's got a big plastic ring thing on the side, and it's about an inch thick, and that has to be determined what were the votes in that, and those votes have to be reflected on a duplicate ballot. As we were going through some of the early boxes marked as original or damaged ballots sent to duplication, we then went to boxes marked duplicate ballots, and we are finding a 6-digit unique identifier, serial number, it says in 16621, on the duplicate ballots, but we're not finding a corresponding serial number on the original ballot that was damaged or otherwise had to be duplicated. In fact, I was so surprised that I brought the 2 observers from the Secretary of State's office over, along with some other volunteer observers from various parties, just to kind of document that we're running into batch after batch after batch of ballots sent to duplication, but there's no unique serial number or identification number on the ballot that had to be duplicated that should correspond with a ballot over in the has been duplicated box, because those should match up one for one, and obviously they should add up to the total number of ballots as a whole, but you literally should be able to say, here's the damaged ballot, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and here's the duplicated ballot, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and anyone should be able to audit and say, yes, we can see that the votes off of the damaged ballot that the machine couldn't read have been correctly, or I think it says truly, a true duplicate copy shall be made. And so it's, we are struggling as to how we're going to be able to match up ballots sent to be duplicated with the ballots that were duplicated if one of those, the originals, are missing that 6-digit number.
Is there, if Maricopa County was willing to help us, is there any chance that they would have something that would provide us that information? I mean, I don't understand how it is we know whether there's the proper number of duplicate ballots. If there's not enough, too many, there's got to be some way. Certainly the board of supervisors must have some way of verifying that. What would that be that we could ask them for if they would be willing to?
Well, I will send a question over to that effect to Maricopa County. On several occasions, Maricopa County has made it clear to me verbally and by email that they will not interact directly with the auditors, which I feel is very unfortunate, that the auditors can't pose these questions directly to the county. So as the liaison, I will understand and encapsulate these in a question, and I'll send them over to the county probably in the next few days as we begin to resume the counting. But this is one of the questions related to duplicate ballots that we just discovered a few days ago, and we're struggling as to how we're going to be able to match the originals to the duplicates if the originals don't have the same serial number as required by 16621 as the duplicate ballot does.
Mr. Logan, part of the list that you had given me that I had put in a letter to ask the supervisors about, we were talking about the ballots, how they are stored in a box. Are they taped with security tape that shows that do not break the seal sort of stuff that we see on crime scenes, or how the ballots are supposed to be stored inside those boxes? Can either of you help explain what we think it's supposed to be? What did you find? Help me out with that, please.
So we were expecting to find the ballots within bags and sealed within those bags. But I think the county gave a pretty good explanation as to the process of archiving things. They remove those and stack them all together. That was a great answer that helped clarify how they do it specifically in Maricopa County.
Okay. Mr. Bennett, are we supposed to be putting them in bags or not? I'm asking because if we are going to be looking at what we can do to improve election integrity for all of Arizona, is that something that we should be pursuing? Should they be kept in bags, or Or is it okay just to put them in boxes?
Well, state statute says that they are sealed when they are moved from a voting center to central count, that they are supposed to be in sealed bags with a numbered seal. And it appears as though that was happening, because one of the things that we're finding in the bottom of these boxes underneath all the ballots is some of these cut plastic seals that have unique numbers on them, and they are probably the seals from the bags of ballots that were transported from a voting center to a central counting location. So I don't think there's anything wrong with the way Maricopa is doing it, but getting an explanation has been helpful to the auditor. And what we are finding is that sometimes these early voting report sheets are at the top of a batch of ballots. The numbers don't always add up as to what the sheet says we should find below that one until we get to the next one. But we're also finding boxes where the only divider between batches of ballots is just a blank piece of paper with 2 digits written on it. And those 2 numbers don't seem to correspond to batch numbers, which are usually many more digits than that. And so we may be discovering the fact that we could do a better job of delineating the batches within boxes, so that, frankly, if you were to audit an election, one of the things that you might want to do is compare the count of votes within a batch to kind of a subtotal from a batch subtotal report that the election management system produces as the ballots are counted in batches. But without a clear identifier as to, what's the identity of this batch of 200 ballots, or 198 if a couple have been sent to duplication or whatever, sometimes we're just finding blank pieces of paper with a number or 2 scribbled on it as the delineation between the end of one batch and the starting of another batch.
Yeah, without a doubt, what we're given is not sufficient to match things up to batch by batch all of the time. In some cases, but it's not all consistent. Every single box is not put together the same way. Some of the boxes, we have ballots stuffed along the side to fill up the box even more. Other boxes don't. So there's differences in the number of ballots that are in it. There's difference in the way they're laid out. And that makes it very difficult to match up batches. So exactly whether a bag is the best answer or there's some other way, we absolutely should be able to open up a box and know for sure that this stack of ballots is associated with a specific batch.
So the purpose, I believe statute, Mr. Bennett, remind me, I believe statute says that we are required to keep ballots for 22 months
Yes.
before they are destroyed. And the reason for that is why?
Well, if there were a question that a court of competent jurisdiction were to order that ballots be opened and recounted or whatever, then you may be recounting ballots for a race in a particular precinct or a city or a Board of Supervisor district. And eventually, either through the ballots themselves, but probably more likely through the images of the ballots that are taken by the election management system, you would need to be able to eventually sort those ballots down to the precinct level to say, were all of the votes in a particular precinct or in a school district or a city council race or whatever correctly recorded by the election management system. So it doesn't happen often that a court would order ballot boxes to be opened during that 22-month retention period, but if there was a question, it would be for that reason.
So make it easier in the future, perhaps. Okay, if we have nothing else, anybody have anything to add as to the chain of custody issues? If not, I'll turn it over.
Well, I guess I would,
Yes,
Madam Chair.
Mr. Bennett.
There's also a chain of custody on the floor of the audit as to, once we received the ballots, they went into locked cages. They're under 24-hour security, and I know we're going to get into some security issues in that, but when a box of ballots is needed at a counting table, there are at least 2 people at all times, sometimes 3 or 4, in what are called the corrals. They are the corral managers, and There's runners that deliver ballots from the corrals to the counting tables. There's a table manager at each table. There's a pod manager that oversees 6 to 12 tables.
Yep.
But when a box of ballots is needed out on the floor for counting or paper evaluation, one of the corral managers has to sign a document, a chain of custody document, for that specific box, and the runner also signs. So there's 2 people signing every time that a box moves somewhere. When that box arrives at the table, now the runner and the table manager are signing for that box as to the chain of custody. When they're finished with it at the table, doing whatever they do, the runner comes back to get it. The table manager and the runner again sign for that chain of custody to go back to the corral. And when the runner goes back to the corral, again, it's 2 people, the corral manager and the runner, signing that that box is now back in the corral. So there's potentially 8 different people. Well, the table manager is probably the same person. But there's 8 different signatures for a box to move from the corral to the table and back. Is that correct?
That sounds right.
Great, thank you. Senator Peterson.
Thank you, Madam President. Got a few questions for Mr. Cotton. I want to, we asked you about your qualifications earlier, but I just had a couple of extra questions on your professional background I want to ask because I thought this was important for your qualifications. Have you been admitted as an expert witness in legal proceedings with respect to your computer forensics?
I have.
Have you testified before the U.S. Congress with respect to the Office of Personal Management breach of 2015?
I have. I believe it was on 3 separate occasions.
I want to go to the passwords, and I want to ask you some questions about that. What level of passwords and access did the county provide you to the Dominion tabulators?
So the county initially provided us a security key and poll worker access to the systems. Now, with the poll level access, you can open a tabulator, you can open an election, and you can close an election. The challenge there is that what my purview is to actually determine the configuration of that tabulator. We know, for example, that there are 2, what they call...
And what do you need to get the...
That requires a separate access at either the administrator or the technician level.
Okay.
Yeah. And we know, for example, that there are 2 RJ45 network connectors on these tabulators. We don't know what those configurations are. We don't know if there is a card internal to the system that might be a Verizon wireless card. We know those tabulators of that model certainly have that capability, but we don't know what the configuration is for the Maricopa County tabulators.
Okay. Who controls, possesses, or has access to the administrative and technician passwords for the tabulators that you need to look at these configurations?
So in the course of communications with the county officials, it was disclosed to us that the Maricopa County officials apparently do not have access at the administrative or technician level for their own tabulating systems. That level of access and those credentials are maintained in the sole possession of 2 Dominion employees that are apparently full-time contractors within the Maricopa County infrastructure.
So, on a practical sense, what are the implications of that only Dominion employees have access to the admin portion and the county does not?
Well, from a cybersecurity standpoint, once again, there's a difference between what is being said in public statements and representations with what the county can actually validate or verify is there on the tabulating systems. So, for example, we have a report from Pro-V&V that the tabulators did not touch the internet. Okay. The county, however, cannot validate or verify that there were or were not Verizon wireless cards inside of those tabulators, which would have, by definition, touched the internet. So, the biggest challenge there is, one, it doesn't appear that they have control of their own equipment when it comes to configuring and preparing for an election. And two, they can't validate that their own policies and procedures are being carried out without the ability to validate the configurations of the systems.
I want to talk to you or ask you about the deleted database. And we're trying to, again, the president sent a letter with questions, there's a response, and we're trying to, there's lots of gaps and holes and really just misinformation on the responses. So I'm trying to get to the bottom of some of these things. The deleted database directory, in the course of your analysis of the EMS server, did you determine that the D database directory had been deleted?
I did, and if I could add a little bit of color behind that. So we follow a very strict forensics acquisition process in which we don't turn on a system if it's delivered to us in a powered off state. We remove the hard drives, we perform forensics imaging with write blocks to prevent any changes to those hard drives, and we produce a bit-for-bit forensics copy of that particular drive. In the case of the EMS server, there were actually 6 drives. 2 of those drives were for the operating system, and they were in what we call a mirror configuration. So if something was changed anywhere on the operating system drive, that would automatically be reflected on both drives. The other 4 drives were data drives, and it turns out that they were in a RAID configuration known as 1+0. So in other words, you have a volume that is not only mirrored, but it's also data redundancy and striped across both drives as well. Obviously, if I don't turn on a system, I don't have access to the RAID parameters, and the county did not provide those to us. So I had to do a discovery process to determine what that RAID configuration was. Part of that process is a scan across those drives to detect partitions of data and to also detect what we call a master file table. So a master file table, very simply put, is a record of all of the directories and the files that are contained in that partition, and a pointing and a pointer to where that data resides on the hard drive. In the course of performing that MFT discovery, I discovered a MFT that clearly indicated that the database directory was deleted from that server. So all of this, however, may be a moot point because subsequently I've been able to recover all of those deleted files and I have access to that data.
So, with that being said, do you still need to get that database from the county, or did that rebuilding or recovery that you did, does that have the information you currently need for that database?
I have the information I need from the recovery efforts of the data.
Okay. Well, I think that's some good news, Madam President.
Yes.
I want to talk about, there were some things that have been brought up. We heard something early on, very early into the audit, something about blue pins. And Mr. Bennett, can you kind of tell us what happened with the blue pin situation? Did that create any kind of a risk to the audit? Oh,
I wasn't on the floor. I'd
okay,
defer to Mr. Logan.
Yeah, if you could kind of tell us what.
Yeah, so we had an observer very early on the first day, before any ballots were on the floor, noticed that we had blue pens out on the tables to be used as part of the counting process. And that was a mistake, and it was an error. And as soon as that person pointed it out, we immediately got those pens off of the floor. All of them were off the floor before there were any ballots out being counted. It was all done within about 5-6 minutes of being told. So we had an observer who identified a problem, and we immediately rectified the
Oh,
situation.
right, no.
Okay.
And,
So there was never, the ballots were never on the
that's what
floor
they have
with any
said,
blueprints.
Correct.
And
I
as
guess
somebody
is-
whose
the
career is
questions
involved in
that,
doing this business.
there was some
I
confusion
think
on
we're gonna
that.
be, pretty careful
I
at
wanna
this
ask
point,
about,
because we've advised them
ballot
not to do
security.
anything like that.
There was,
did the-
again, early on,
so,
some question about
with that,
ballot
I want you
security.
to know that I
Tell
do
me
take
about
this
how the
so
ballots have been
seriously.
protected
We
and
did
secured
identify the person, we
through
talked
this
with the
whole
person,
process.
we
And I don't
will
know if
do
that's a Ken
everything we
question or a
can
Doug
to
question.
protect
Okay.
your privacy and your personal integrity. So,
Immediately upon receiving the machines on the
now
21st of
with
April
that,
and the ballots on the 22nd, those pallets and equipment were taken into locked cages, and I think there's only 2 people who have keys to that, and
So I kind of
I'm not one of those 2. Although as questions have arisen on
came back,
certain
I
boxes
brushed my
related
teeth and I
to
put my
the
mask on and
duplicated
realized,
ballots,
oh my
or
gosh,
we found some
you got to really be careful what you eat
counter
for lunch
slips
because it is
in one of the
staying
boxes
with
in
you.
between a bunch of ballots
So I
that
had,
did
like,
have some voter
peppers and
names
my
and
eyes are,
addresses
like,
on them.
watering.
And
So,
for
I'm
reasons
not
of
having a
security,
stroke up here if it
I was
looks like,
called and we took
that's what's
those
going on.
out of the ballot box and
couple of
created
things
a
that I
new
just
box. So
wanted
we
to
now have
clear up
1,682
from
boxes,
the beginning. One thing
so that
before
we
I
have
forget.
secured those.
You are gonna
There was
see,
about 1,000
particularly
pages.
our
But
team, maybe the defense team as
we
well.
have secured both the
Because we all have
equipment
to
and the
communicate,
ballots behind
we are
locked
doing it by
cages.
texting and
They
Zoom.
have
So when you
24/7
see us texting, we're not on
live
dating
video
apps.
streaming.
We're not checking
There's
the
armed
stocks.
security guards
I'm not.
present
Maybe Tim,
over
he's
the
married too.
ballots
Actually,
and
none of
the
us should be on dating apps.
the
Probably
equipment
not the-
since they have been
probably not the
delivered.
defense team either.
We have not had any
We're
breaches
communicating with each
of
other
the
because
the
that's what we
cages
have
where
to
the
do.
ballots
Internet in
or
here
the
goes
machines
off and on.
have been kept.
So I wanted to make sure you knew that's what we were doing.
In
Second
addition
thing
to armed
is
security on the
obviously,
floor, where
every
the
once in a
machines and the
while,
ballots
when
are,
you're up here
we have
and you're
armed
speaking,
security at
you're going
the
to
doors
misspeak.
of the
And something
building,
I said,
and we have armed
just wanted to
security at
correct
outer
myself. I
areas
realized
of
right
the
after I said
fairgrounds
it,
property where
I
you don't
told
get
you
close to the building
that
unless
I
your
needed to
name
prove
is
that
on a
Bob
list
Durst
of needing to be there for the right
intentionally
reasons.
killed Kathy
And
Durst. Don't have to prove that at all. What I have to prove for the witness killing special
interestingly,
circumstance is
the
that
only
Susan Berman was a
attempted
witness to
breach
some
of
kind
security
criminal conduct,
was an individual who
and that Bob Durst killed
posed
Susan
themselves as a member of the
because
press
of that.
when Mr.
So
Logan
in other
and
words,
myself, and
even
Mr.
if
Brakey
it
had
was less than a homicide and simply Bob
I guess a
Durst
briefing on the
committed an
floor
action
showing
and
how ballots
got
would
rid
go
of
around the
body,
counting tables and things like that, and
that
an
would be
individual,
enough if you
Ryan
believe that
Macias,
evidence beyond a reasonable doubt.
presented himself as a member of the press, but when he couldn't
apologize if I
produce
missed
press
though.
credentials, he was denied
So
access.
continuing,
He
we
later,
were talking
on a
about
different day, tried to present himself as a member of the press at one of the
So in
outer
the fall of
security
1971,
points.
when Bob Durst was 29,
But then a few days later,
met
he ended up being one of
19-year-old
the
Kathy
people
McCormick.
designated by the Secretary of
And
State's
shortly
office as one of their
thereafter,
observers.
they
So
got married.
once he
Kathy,
was
at the
designated
time,
as
there
an
was a
observer from the Secretary of
significant
State's office, he has been allowed on the floor as an observer. But that's the
Oh, we lost
only
the TV over here?
security breach that I'm aware of. No one else has had it. No one who didn't have need to be having access to the machines or the ballots have been in the ballot corrals or the locked security cages holding the machines.
Is there other questions I have for now, Madam
got it.
President?
Thank you. I was going to go down, just add on to that. So when we're talking about the security, Mr. Bennett, you talked
So as I
about
was
the
saying, there was
officers,
a-
you've talked about the situations there. Talk to us about, and the reason why I know this is because when we
the
entered the
significant age
contract, you
difference,
had
it's
told
not
me what
just
your
that
plans were, and I've
you
actually
had in that
been
10
watching
years.
this on live stream.
It's that Kathy was
Can you
very
please
young when
explain
he
the
was
security as to
So they met when
the
she was in
filming
essence a
and
kid,
the live
and
streaming and
very
everything
shortly
else
thereafter,
there
they
as
ended up getting
to
married. As
what is being,
we said
how is that
before,
being watched?
Kathy
When is
was
it, who's
from a
being
very
watched
close
by,
family.
and for what purposes are we doing
They
the
had
different
never
levels
seen- they were
of
from Long Island,
filming and live streaming?
Middle class
The
at
the entire
best.
room where
And,
the counting takes
Bob
place
Durst
and the
was
entire area where
living a
the
life
forensics
and was the
data
kind of
acquisition
person that
took
was
place
a world
are all
away.
covered in live
Once
stream
married,
24/7.
The DERS split their
Those are
time
being
between the
viewed, as far as we
penthouse
know, across the world.
on 37
by thousands of
Riverside Drive on the
individuals.
upper
We get
west side of
reports
Manhattan,
at times
and
of
eventually
things that people are seeing.
they had an
that
apartment
most
on
of
the
our
Upper
suspicious
East Side
situations that when we look
at
at the end of
12
it,
East
there was actually no
86th Street.
problem.
This has
It's
become
all intended.
important
In addition to
because
the
this
live
was the
streaming
location
cameras that
where
we have, we
Kathy
also
would
have
end up primarily
what I call our
living
accountability cameras,
at the time
where over every
that
single counting
she
table, we
disappeared.
have
And the
a
reason she
camera
was
that
living there
aims
is
straight
that she
down
was
at the
going to
table to see who's
school
there,
at
to see what's
Einstein
going on at the table, and we have one
in the
that
Bronx.
catches the
And
ballot as
so
it goes around.
this
So
apartment
that
was much
if
closer
our process,
than on
because
the
we have
Upper
three
West
individuals
Side
who are
where the
counting at one
apartment
time,
was in Manhattan.
it would be
They
impossible
also
for one
had a
individual to try to
weekend
change
lakeside
any
cottage
of the vote tallies.
an hour
And
away
by
in South
having, it
Salem,
would take
which is in Westchester
two or more
County.
people in order
And
to
that's
conclude
where
that
the
you can
evidence
get-
is going to
get
show
any type of
that
change
Bob
in
Durst
things.
killed Kathy.
And the
She
nature of the way
never
the
made it
cameras
back to
are is there'd be a
Manhattan.
full digital
She
trail of who
died
that person
at that
was,
house
what was going on,
January
and
31st,
all of that goes
1982.
into our cameras.
So from the
as
start
one
of their
I think one of the best
relationship,
examples we have is we had an
Bob
individual
Durst was
who we were told
admittedly
there was a
controlled.
USB that had been plugged into a
And
computer.
this is not
and
my
people were concerned, and
perception
we got
or
some
my
message from someone
description.
about this, and
This,
within
again,
about 15
comes
minutes
directly
of
from
that
Bob
occurrence
Durst himself.
happening, we were able to go to our video streams, pull up the video footage, find out exactly who it was. It was someone on our IT team
Now,
that was designated
Bob
by the
Durst
fact they were in a black
also
shirt,
sought
which
to
is we have
control
everyone in
Kathy with
outfits
his
based
money.
on roles. They were doing an
he
update
was
on
very
one of the
clear about
computers
that.
that had to be done via USB because it's an air-gapped system, so there's no way to connect out to the outside network. So within about 30, 35 minutes of it being identified, we were able to hone in on who it was and confirm that in fact it was an expected person doing their job duties.
Whatever she gave her was, that was it.
Okay, let's ask a question about, obviously at the beginning, I explained why we're 6 months down the road from when the election
So,
first happened,
19-year-old
and
Kathy Durst.
you've explained why your audit is different than the other ones.
And eventually, Kathy
We
Durst
had
did
expected,
nothing.
which was out there in the media, we had
eventually,
expected
Kathy
that,
Durst did
and
nothing.
according to our contract, to be honest with you, that
So
this would be
Kathy Durst
done
in 1982
before
was no
the
longer
Coliseum
that
needed it
19-year-old
again.
kid.
I know
She
that
was a
some of the
couple
delays
months
have
from
been
becoming a
because
doctor.
of
And
outside forces and everything we
Kathy was
described, but
no
can you give us some more insight about,
kind of shy,
you know, where you're at
quiet,
now? Why
passive
have we not
person.
gotten a little bit
And
further?
Kathy
And where do
became-
we go from here? When can we complete this? When can we button this up? And because a lot of people are wanting to know what these results are.
So we're expecting to finish the counting process before the end of June. We have had a number of technical issues that we ran through over the course of everything that's required some adjustments and bringing in a whole bunch of more people to make the counting happen. We've made those adjustments. We have a great process in place, and we're expected to be well within that timeline.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, Madam President, I really appreciate you guys being here. Again, I wish the county would have been here because I'm sure that there were questions that, there's unanswered questions or more, maybe more explanation. I just want to, and I know you said this, Madam President, I'm not putting words in your mouth. We want to work together with them. We want to be partners, and we don't need to do any name calling. We just need communication. We need to answer questions. I think 95% of this stuff so far has just been a matter of communication. Somebody needs to know why it is the way it is. 5% of it, though, I think is stuff where, you know what, maybe the legislature needs to implement some laws to make the process more secure. And make sure that the process runs smoother. And that's really what we're, the biggest thing we're trying to accomplish here is making sure that this is a process that our citizens can trust and that they can count on.
Is there anything that, I'm trying to go by all those questions that you guys gave me, which is what I passed to Maricopa County to get those answers. Did I miss anything? Are there more questions that, I know Mr. Bennett said that he was going to keep going with his list of questions to see if you could help, maybe Mr. Barrett or Mr. Jarrett, or somebody might be able to at least offer a twig of kindness and give us some answers.
Well-
But did we miss anything else, or is there something else that I need to ask of you or you need to ask of us?
I think one thing I do want to specifically clarify, it's been brought up a number of times that this password that we need for the tabulators somehow gives access to the source code. It does not give access to the source code. Source code is what the programmer writes, which gets turned into a program, and then that program is what is actually deployed in any given system. There's some miscommunication or misunderstanding to think that this password would give access to any source code, and so hopefully that can help alleviate some concerns and get what we need in order to finish this audit.
Okay, that was helpful. Mr. Bennett, Mr. Cotton, anything you want
One
to
thing I
add?
would add is that should we receive those passwords for the tabulators, that for us to collect that data is probably a matter of less than 2 days that we need to continue with for our analysis.
Okay, that would be very, very helpful. Okay. So not to belabor this, go on, I know this is live stream, people have things to do in their lives, so I would like to continue to get, I know we're in a hiatus this week because of the graduations that are going in. Speaking of that, can you tell me where the ballots are right now? Where's the equipment? If it's not on the floor of the Coliseum. Mr. Bennett?
Yes, the machines and the ballots were loaded into locked trailers and moved to a building elsewhere on the premises of the Arizona State Fairgrounds. They are also being live streamed 24/7 by video camera. They also are being watched 24/7 by armed security, both inside and outside the building. And there may be one opportunity yet, maybe today, when we need to put some hard drives that have been being copied over the weekend back into one of the trucks, but they are under guarded security as well, and everything has been smooth as far as moving the ballots over to that other building. They're in locked trailers. The air conditioning or swamp coolers have been on, so there's no risk of physical damage from heat or otherwise to the ballots or the machines. And it was all done under observation by the Secretary of State observers. And when the building is finished with the graduations and they've had time to clean up the building, which I think will probably be Friday or Saturday of this weekend, we'll move back and be ready to go Monday.
Great. That's Mr. Peterson?
Yeah, just a closing comment, Madam, or I don't know if you're done, but closing comment for me would just be that, Madam President, this is the first forensic audit done on this scale in the history of this country.
That's true.
It's, I just want to commend the contractors for, in spite of the intense opposition and intense efforts to shut this down, not only do we have 24-hour security, we have 24-hour efforts to shut down the audit. And they have done a great job, I think, of adjusting and setting up, and I think it's will set a precedence and help people learn from here's things that were encountered and here's what needs to be done. So when the next forensic audit is done, it will be a completely smooth process from start to finish. But they are now, moving into a rhythm here, and I look forward to this being completed over the next weeks.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. And, when we did all this research, I got a hold of, and you did as well, the Federal Elections Commission, and asked them, could you refer us to some forensic auditors? And they go, there aren't certified, and they said there really aren't any because there are none. I did find one company that works for Homeland Security, and their price was about $8 million to do this. But this is a whole new breaking ground. I've had other senators and Senate presidents and speakers from other states that have contacted me that said this is an issue that they are struggling with as well to make sure, and they have said this is what's going to lay the groundwork as to what is the future of how do we audit our elections if need be? What do we do to make sure that we're following every best practices possible so that if we do need to answer questions, we can do that easily and put the confidence back into our voter integrity, our elections. So the only thing I'm closing with here is, obviously keep us in the loop. We will keep reaching out to you to make sure that you have everything necessary. And, and as questions are brought to us, that we're going to come to you and say we need an explanation for this or that or whatever. This is not about, this is not personal, never should be personal. I'm so disappointed and saddened that the Board of Supervisors yesterday, some of the hurtful comments that were made, which is sad. These guys have been my friends for some of them 20 years. This is not personal. This is about our jobs as elected officials. It is our jobs that we have to answer to our constituents, to the voters, to the taxpayers. There was something that was said that was very hurtful about how the Senate is wasting taxpayer monies on this. First of all, I don't think that there's ever any waste of money if we are ensuring that our elections are good, our police forces are good, departments are being run efficiently. That's part of government. This is what accountability is all about. And I'm only saddened that it's cost us more taxpayer monies because we never wanted the ballots and the equipment moved from McTech to begin with. We said, let us go there. Let us do this together. And instead, we have had to spend so much of taxpayer monies now of having to actually rent the Coliseum out, set up all the security system that you explained to us and the cost of that and all the security officers we've had to hire. It just, it's a sad that we've had to spend all that extra money when we could have done it for much less had we just worked together as a team. But I am hopeful that maybe from here on out they will want to be a part of this and help us make sure that all elections in Arizona are done right, done correctly, and we look forward to working with them. So if there is nothing else, I will adjourn this meeting. Thank you.